Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into a world that feels familiar at first glance, yet quickly proves itself strange the longer you stay there. You wake before the sun fully commits to the sky, not because an alarm demands it, but because light itself presses gently through thin glass and unfinished shutters. The room is cool. The air smells faintly of wood smoke that never truly leaves the walls. Somewhere nearby, a rooster clears his throat like an impatient neighbour. You lie still for a moment listening, realising that in 1776, America the day does not wait for you to be ready. You probably will not survive this. Not because of a dramatic battlefield or some heroic last stand, but because everyday life itself is quietly exhausting. Survival here is not about bravery. It is about endurance routine, and knowing how to do 100 small things correctly every single day without shortcuts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to share where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Somewhere in the world, someone else is also waking up to this story. Now dim the lights, and let your attention drift back into the room where you wake. The bed beneath you is not really a bed in the modern sense. It is a wooden frame, sometimes just ropes, stretched tight topped with a mattress stuffed with straw, corn husks, or feathers if you're lucky. As you shift it rustles softly a dry whispering sound that reminds you the stuffing inside was once part of a field. Sheets, if you have them, are coarse linen. They hold the faint smell of soap sweat and seasons of use. Cleanliness here is relative. Nothing is truly fresh, only less dirty than yesterday. You're likely not alone. Many households sleep several people to a room, sometimes to a bed. Privacy is a luxury few can afford. Children, siblings, apprentices, or extended family might be breathing nearby, their sleep marked by quiet sighs and occasional murmurs. This closeness is normal. Personal space has not yet been invented as a concept anyone would recognize. As you sit up, the chill reminds you that fire is expensive in effort, not money. Wood must be chopped, carried, and carefully rationed. The hearth may still be warm from the night before, glowing faintly like a sleeping animal, but it will need coaxing soon. Winter or summer, the day begins with tending fire because without it, nothing else happens. A widely accepted fact among historians is that most colonial Americans structured their entire day around daylight rather than clocks. Mechanical clocks exist, of course, but they are uncommon and often inaccurate. Time is felt, not measured. You know it is morning because the light says so, because animals say so, because your body has learned when to wake. In some towns a bell might ring. In rural areas nature handles scheduling. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, feet meeting a cold wooden floor. Shoes are nearby, heavy and stiff, shaped by wear rather than comfort. Going barefoot indoors is common, but outdoors protection matters. Splinters, mud, animal waste, and sharp stones wait patiently for exposed skin. As you stand, you become aware of the quiet weight of responsibility already pressing in. Food must be prepared. Animals must be checked, water must be fetched, children must be guided into usefulness as early as possible. No task is optional. Even wealthier households rely on constant labour, whether by family members, servants, or enslaved people. Here comes one of those strange little details that feels almost unbelievable now. In many homes, people deliberately wake earlier than necessary simply to sit quietly for a moment before the household stirs. Some letters and diaries hint at this private time as a rare mental refuge. Not meditation exactly, but a pause where thoughts can form without interruption. It is one of the few moments in the day that belongs entirely to you. Scholars continue to debate whether this early quiet was cherished in the same way across different classes, or if it was mostly a privilege of those whose labour allowed even a few spare minutes. What seems clear is that silence itself was valued differently. There is less noise overall, but far less control over when it arrives. You pull on your clothes slowly. There is no separate wardrobe for sleeping and waking. You may have slept in part of what you will wear today. Linen shirt first, cool against the skin. Wool layers follow if the weather demands it. Everything is practical. Nothing is decorative without reason. Buttons are precious. Fabric is reused until it cannot be used any more, then reused again for rags, insulation or patching. The smell of the room changes as movement stirs the air. Old smoke, damp wood and the faint sweetness of stored grain mingle together. This is the smell of home. It will follow you everywhere, embedded in your clothes and hair. Outside, the world is already waking. You hear footsteps on packed earth, the low voices of neighbours greeting one another, the creak of wagon wheels starting their slow groan. No one rushes, but no one lingers either. The pace is steady, shaped by necessity rather than ambition. Another well-established historical reality is that most people in 1776, America never imagined themselves as living through a famous moment. The year would later become monumental, but to you right now, it is just another morning with work to be done. Political ideas exist, yes, but they hover at the edges of daily life like distant thunder. What matters first is whether the fire catches, whether the bread rises, whether everyone makes it through the day unhurt. A curious aside that still surprises researchers is how rarely people wrote about boredom. Diaries mention fatigue, worry and discomfort, but rarely emptiness. Life is too full of tasks to feel dull. Exhaustion leaves little room for restlessness. You step closer to the hearth, kneeling to coax the fire awake. Sparks snap softly. The sound is intimate, familiar. You have done this countless times. Your hands know what to do, even if your mind is still drifting between sleep and waking. As the flames grow, warmth spreads slowly, unevenly. Shadows dance across the walls, stretching and shrinking as if the room itself is breathing. This flickering light will guide much of your day. Candles exist, but they're used sparingly. Firelight is precious, both comforting and dangerous. You pause just for a moment, feeling the weight of the day ahead. There is no concept of a weekend waiting to rescue you. Rest comes in fragments stolen between tasks, and yet there is a strange steadiness here, a rhythm that holds everything together. As the fire settles into a steady glow, the household begins to stir around you. The quiet dissolves into motion. The day has started whether you are ready or not, and you move forward with it step by step into the ordinary reality of 1776 America. Sleep here is not the deep, uninterrupted plunge you might expect. It arrives in layers shallow at first, then heavier, then lighter again. You drift in and out, aware of bodies shifting nearby of the house, settling with small pops and sighs of the fire, breathing quietly in the hearth. Night in 1776. America is not a sealed container. It leaks sound, temperature and thought. When you finally remember waking during the night, it does not feel unusual. Many people do. A long-held historical observation suggests that segmented sleep was common. You sleep for several hours, wake for a while, then return to rest again. This middle waking period is not considered insomnia. It is simply part of the night. You might pray, think, talk softly, or tend to a small task by candlelight. Darkness stretches longer here, and the body adapts. The space you sleep in is shaped by necessity, not comfort. Bedrooms as private sanctuaries are rare. Instead, rooms are multi-purpose. During the day, this space may hold storage, mending work, or children at play. At night, it transforms into a sleeping area. Beds are often shared not only by couples, but by siblings, apprentices, or anyone passing through who needs shelter. Warmth matters more than solitude. You feel the mattress beneath you again, uneven and alive with texture. Straw shifts. Feathers poke through ticking that has been patched many times. Insects are an accepted risk. Fleas and lice are common companions, especially in warmer months. Scratching is normal. You learn to sleep through it, or you simply wake and scratch without thinking. Blankets are heavy, woven thick to trap heat. Wool smells faintly of animal, especially when damp. In winter, Layers are piled high. In summer, the problem reverses. Heat settles and refuses to leave. Windows are small and sometimes sealed shut for months. Air moves slowly, sweat sticks to skin. You shift, searching for cooler patches of linen. A mainstream historical understanding tells us that most colonial homes were poorly insulated by modern standards. Walls let in drafts. Roofs leak heat. In winter, ice sometimes forms inside near windows. In summer, the house becomes an oven by afternoon. Sleep is shaped by the season as much as by exhaustion. Sound travels differently at night. Without engines or electricity, the world quiets in a way that feels almost complete. You hear things you would ignore today. A distant dog barking, wind moving through trees, the faint crack of cooling wood in the frame of the house. Even the breath of the person beside you becomes a kind of rhythm, something your own breathing unconsciously matches. There is an odd comfort in this shared vulnerability. Locks exist, but many doors are secured more by habit than hardware. Communities rely on proximity and familiarity. You know the sounds of your household. Anything unfamiliar stands out immediately. A lesser known but fascinating detail appears in personal letters. Some people intentionally position their beds to face east, believing morning light or divine symbolism mattered. Others arrange sleeping spaces around the hearth, believing fire offered protection against illness and evil alike. These beliefs vary widely and hint at a mental world where physical comfort and spiritual safety blur together. Scholars still debate how much sleep deprivation affected daily life. Some argue that shorter broken sleep was offset by naps and seasonal rhythms. Others suggest that chronic fatigue was simply accepted as normal. What is clear is that the idea of waking fully refreshed is not part of the expectation. You wake because you must not, because you're done resting. Nighttime also brings vulnerability. Fire is both ally and threat. Many families bank the fire, carefully covering embers with ash to preserve heat without risking sparks. Despite precautions, fires are common and devastating. You sleep with one ear tuned for danger, even if only subconsciously. The darkness itself feels heavier. Without streetlights, the night presses close to the walls. Step outside and the stars explode across the sky, bright and crowded. Indoors, shadows gather in corners. Candles flicker, casting faces into unfamiliar shapes. Children sometimes fear the dark, but so do adults, though they rarely admit it. You become aware of smells more intensely at night. The day's labour lingers in clothing and skin. Smoke clings. Animals housed nearby add their own presence. Chamber pots are kept close used, quietly emptied later. Hygiene is practical rather than fastidious. Clean enough is good enough. A quirky observation from household accounts suggests that some families intentionally rotated sleeping positions, believing it helped prevent illness or bad luck. Others slept with personal items, close tools or weapons ready in case of emergency. Sleep is not a surrender, it is a cautious truce. As the night deepens, the house settles into its rhythm. Breathing synchronizes, creaks repeat. Your own thoughts slow, shaped by fatigue rather than intention. Worries still surface about food stores, weather, health and money, but they float more gently now, less sharp at the edges. Eventually you drift again. Not into oblivion, but into a lighter state where dreams mingle easily with reality. You might dream of the day's work of walking long roads of voices calling your name. Dreams here are not analysed. They are noted, sometimes shared, sometimes ignored. When morning comes, it arrives gradually. First a subtle lightening of darkness, then the sound of animals stirring, then movement nearby. You wake not all at once, but in stages, body reassembling itself for another day. As your eyes open, the memory of shared sleep lingers. This closeness, this lack of separation between lives is simply how things are. Rest here is communal, imperfect, and deeply human. You rise knowing that tonight you will return to this same space, the same patterns, the same half-dreamed rhythms that carry you through life in 1776 America. You dress slowly, not because you are lingering, but because every garment has weight and consequence. Clothes into 1776. America are not expressions of personality. They are tools. They protect you from weather, from injury, from judgment. As fabric settles against your skin, you feel immediately whether the day will be comfortable or punishing. The linen shirt goes on first. It is thin but sturdy, woven tightly enough to last years. Linen is valued because it can be washed hard and often. Cleanliness here does not mean spotless. It means serviceable. The shirt carries faint traces of soap and sun from its last washing, a small victory over grime. If it feels especially soft, it is because it has been worn and repaired many times already. Over that comes wool if the season demands it. Wool scratches slightly, especially when new, but you have learned how to layer it so seams fall where they bother you least. In cold months, wool is life. It traps heat even when damp. In summer, you endure it because there is no better alternative for durability. Cotton exists, but it is not cheap or common in finished garments. A well-known historical reality is that most people owned very few sets of clothing. 2 outfits might be plenty. One for daily work, one for church or important occasions. Clothing is expensive in time as much as materials. Spinning, weaving, cutting, sewing, and mending all take hours. You treat fabric with respect because replacing it is not simple. As you pull on breeches or a skirt, you feel how clothing shapes movement. Nothing stretches. Everything resists slightly. You learn how to bend, lift, and walk within these limits. Fashion follows function. Even wealthier styles remain structured and heavy by modern standards. Comfort is secondary to durability and propriety. Shoes come next, stiff leather shaped more by past wear than by your foot. They rub at first, then soften slowly over months or years. Many people own only one pair. Soles are repaired repeatedly. When shoes finally fail, you might go barefoot longer than feels safe, especially indoors or in summer fields. You fasten buttons or tie strings, noticing how many closures rely on simple knots rather than metal. Buttons are valuable enough to be salvaged when garments fall apart. Nothing is thrown away without being reduced to its smallest usable form. There is a social language embedded in clothing that you absorb without thinking. Clean but patched suggests respectability and effort. Dirty or torn without repair suggests neglect or poverty. Fine fabric signals wealth, but also invites scrutiny. People notice clothing quickly because it reveals how carefully you manage your life. A curious detail emerges from probate inventories and personal accounts. Some families listed clothing as one of their most valuable possessions, ranking it alongside tools and livestock. To modern eyes, this seems strange, but here clothing represents stored labour. It is work you do not have to redo. Historians still disagree on how rigidly class boundaries were enforced through dress in colonial America. Some argue that clothing allowed for more social fluidity than later periods. Others suggest that subtle distinctions in fabric cut and cleanliness were read instantly by those who knew how to look. What is certain is that appearance mattered even when survival came first. You adjust your outer layer and feel the weight settle onto your shoulders. Coats are heavy, long, and often passed down. In bad weather they become armour. In good weather they are carried rather than worn, draped over an arm or saddle. Hair is handled simply, styles are practical. Wigs exist, but mostly among the wealthy or professional classes. Powdered hair is more likely in cities. For most people, hair is tied back, covered, or braided to keep it out of the way. Hats are nearly universal outdoors. They protect from sun, rain, and social judgment. Going bareheaded in public feels oddly exposed. You glance down at your hands. Nails are short, often broken. Skin is roughened by work. Gloves exist, but are used selectively. Hands tell stories here. They reveal occupation, age, and health more honestly than words. There's a small, almost humorous detail recorded in some letters. People complained about the smell of new wool clothing, describing it as sheep-like or oily. Yet they still prized it. The smell faded with use, replaced by smoke and sweat, which felt more familiar. As you finish dressing, you become aware that your clothes will not change again until evening. There is no fresh outfit waiting after work. You will eat labour travel and socialise in these same garments. Spills are brushed off. Stains are accepted. Perfection is not expected. The sensation of being fully dressed brings a sense of readiness. Clothing here is psychological as well as physical. It signals that the day has begun and that you are prepared to meet it. Even children feel this shift. Being dressed means being useful. As you step closer to the door, the fabric creaks softly with movement. Wool whispers, linen rustles. These sounds are part of the household morning as familiar as voices and fire. You pause briefly, adjusting a sleeve, tightening a tie. The weight of your clothes grounds you. They remind you that the body is not separate from the day's work. Everything you do will be done inside these layers under the same sky, carrying the same smells and textures until night returns. With one last glance around the room, you move forward, dressed not for comfort, but for reality, stepping fully into the lived world of 1776 America. Morning moves forward whether you feel ready or not, and hunger makes that fact impossible to ignore. Breakfast in 1776. America does not announce itself with variety or aroma drifting from a machine. It begins quietly with preparation that started long before you woke. You feel it now as your stomach tightens, not demanding choice, only sustenance. You step closer to the hearth where the fire you coaxed earlier has settled into a steady, useful heat. Someone has already placed a pot nearby. It is darkened from years of use, its surface scarred but dependable. Meals here are built on repetition. Familiarity is not boredom. It is reassurance. A common understanding drawn from household records is that breakfast rarely differed much from other meals. There is no special category for morning food. You eat what is available, what keeps and what fills you enough to work. Cornmeal is everywhere. It becomes porridge mush or bread depending on time and tools. The smell is plain and earthy, slightly sweet when fresh. Water must be fetched before anything else. You or someone nearby steps outside with a bucket boot scraping against packed earth. The air's cool damp with morning. The walk to the well or pump is short but necessary. Each trip reminds you that convenience does not exist here. Every action has weight because it requires movement. Back inside, water is poured carefully. Nothing is wasted. Spills are wiped with practiced efficiency. The pot begins to steam, slowly releasing a smell that promises warmth more than pleasure. Salt might be added if you have it. Milk, if available, would be a luxury, especially fresh. More often it is reserved for children or saved for butter and cheese. One small but telling detail appears again and again in family journals. Sweeteners are scarce. Sugar exists, but it is expensive and used sparingly. Honey or molasses might appear occasionally, transforming an ordinary meal into something special. When that happens, it is remembered. There is bread, as well dense and filling. It was baked days ago, sometimes weeks, and has hardened slightly. You tear it with your hands rather than slicing it. Knives are tools, not tableware. Butter is spread thin, if at all. Fat is precious. It carries calories and flavour that your body craves. You eat standing or sitting wherever space allows. There is no formal table in many homes. Children eat quickly, already restless. Adults eat with purpose, aware that work waits. Conversation is minimal. Morning is not for reflection. It is for preparation. Modern researchers broadly agree that colonial Americans consumed far more calories at breakfast than many people do today, not because they indulged, but because labour demanded it. Food is fuel. If you fail to eat enough now, you will feel it later in shaking hands and slowed movements. The act of eating is quiet. Utensils are few. Spoons are common, forks less so. Plates are shared. Wooden bowls absorb smells from previous meals, layering flavours over time. This does not bother you. It is simply how things taste. There is a faint smell of smoke clinging to everything. It settles into food, clothing and hair. You barely notice it anymore. Visitors do. Smoke is the background scent of life. An unusual practice surfaces in some regions. People dip bread into beer or cider at breakfast. This is not indulgence, it is practical. Water quality is unreliable and fermented drinks are safer. Alcohol content is low. Even children may drink diluted cider. It hydrates and energizes without concern. There remains disagreement among scholars about how often meat appeared in morning meals. Some argue it was common in rural areas where livestock was accessible. Others suggest meat was saved for later in the day or special occasions. What seems clear is that breakfast was never meant to impress. It was meant to sustain. You notice how quickly the meal disappears. There is no lingering. Bowls are scraped clean. Crumbs are saved for animals. Leftovers are folded back into the household rhythm. Nothing pauses the day for long. As dishes are cleared, you feel the shift. Eating is over. The day asserts itself again. Tools are gathered. Children are redirected. Animals wait. The fire must be adjusted for the next task. The absence of choice stands out. You do not ask what you want. You accept what is there. This acceptance shapes expectations. Contentment is quieter but steadier. You measure satisfaction by readiness rather than pleasure. A passing remark in a farmer's account mentions missing breakfast once during a harsh winter and remembering it vividly years later. Hunger leaves impressions when food is normally reliable. This tells you how central routine meals are to emotional stability. Your body feels warmer now, steadier. Energy settles in not like a rush, but like a slow filling of empty spaces. This is enough. Enough to work. Enough to endure. As you step away from the hearth, the smell of cornmeal lingers faintly in the air. It will fade, replaced by other scents as the day unfolds. But for now, breakfast has done its job. You are fed, not spoiled, and ready to move forward into the long hours ahead, carrying the quiet strength that comes from knowing how to begin a day in 1776 America. You step outside and the day meets you with sound before anything else. Not noise in the modern sense, but a layered presence that tells you life is already underway. The ground is firm beneath your feet, packed hard by years of use. As you walk, your boots make a dull rhythm against earth and wood, a sound that blends easily into the morning rather than interrupting it. The town or settlement around you feels awake without feeling hurried. Hooves strike the road with a hollow clop as a horse is led past its breath, puffing softly in the cool air. A wagon creaks, protesting as weight shifts across its wooden frame. Somewhere nearby, metal taps against metal, steady and purposeful. These are the sounds of work beginning, not of chaos. What strikes you first is how open everything feels. Doors are left ajar. Windows are uncovered. Voices travel freely, carried by the air without engines or walls to stop them. You hear greetings exchanged casually, not shouted, just spoken with familiarity. People know who belongs here. Strangers stand out quickly. Accounts from the period consistently show that towns and villages were defined more by sound than by sight. You could often identify a place with your eyes closed, recognizing it by its rhythms. A port town smells of salt and tar and echoes with gulls and rigging. A farming village hums with animals, tools, and human voices layered together. You walk a little farther and the smellscape shifts. Wood smoke thins as you move away from homes. Earth takes over damp and mineral. Manure is present, not hidden or apologized for. Animals share this space openly. Chickens scatter at your approach, feathers ruffling. A pig grunts, unimpressed by your presence. People move with intention. No one wanders aimlessly for long. Even children carry objects, fetch items, or trail behind adults, absorbing the pattern of usefulness. Leisure exists, but it is tucked between obligations, not separate from them. There is a subtle social choreography unfolding. Men pause to exchange a few words, often about weather or work. Women communicate while moving, passing information as they carry baskets or tend to tasks. News travels like this, woven into daily motion rather than announced. One detail that often surprises modern readers appears in town descriptions. Bells are used sparingly. Church bells mark important moments, but everyday timekeeping relies on habit. Too much noise is unnecessary. Silence when it happens feels meaningful. There is still disagreement among historians about how loud colonial towns truly were compared to modern cities. Some argue that without machinery, overall volume was lower. Others point out that animals, people, and constant manual labour created a steady backdrop of sound that never truly stopped. What is clear is that sound carried differently, travelling farther and feeling more personal. You notice how quickly you can identify individuals by sound alone. Footsteps vary. Tools strike with recognisable patterns. Voices are familiar. This closeness reinforces accountability. It is hard to disappear in a place where everyone knows how you move. An almost throwaway comment in one traveller's journal mentions feeling unsettled by the quiet at night after leaving a busy settlement. The absence of sound made it difficult to sleep. Noise here is not disturbance, it is reassurance. As you pass by workshops, the sounds sharpen slightly. A hammer rings against metal clean and bright. A saw bites into wood with a steady rasp. These sounds are honest. They announce creation rather than consumption. You can tell what is being made by listening. Smells layer themselves onto the air. Tanned leather brings a sharp, oily note. Fresh cut wood smells sweet and green. Bread baking somewhere down the street adds warmth to the mix. You inhale without thinking, your body cataloguing these signals as familiar markers of safety. The road itself tells stories. Grooves carved by wagon wheels guide your steps. Mud dries unevenly, recording yesterday's weather. You read the ground unconsciously, knowing where to step and where to avoid. Shoes are precious. A twisted ankle could undo weeks of labour. People acknowledge one another with nods or brief words. Politeness is efficient. There is no small talk for its own sake, but there is recognition. Belonging here is quiet and constant. A curious practice noted in some communities involved designated town criers, but they were not universal. In many places, important announcements were spread informally repeated from mouth to mouth until everyone knew. Accuracy depended on trust rather than authority. You pause for a moment, letting the soundscape wash over you. There is no single dominant noise. Instead, everything exists in balance. Movement, breath, tool, animal, and voice blend into a living pattern that feels steady and predictable. As you continue walking, you realize that these sounds will follow you all day. They will change in pitch and pace as tasks shift, but they will not disappear. Even solitude here carries echoes of others nearby. By the time you turn toward your next responsibility, the town has fully claimed you. You're no longer just moving through space. You are participating in it. Each step adds to the rhythm, each sound confirming that you belong to this ordinary, hard-working world of 1776 America. Work begins without ceremony. There is no bell, no announcement that separates life from labour, because the two have never truly been divided. You step into your task as naturally as breathing, guided by habit rather than instruction. Whatever your place in this world, work defines how the day unfolds and how you are seen by others. If you are a farmer, your attention turns immediately to land and animals. Fields wait patiently, but they do not forgive delay. You feel soil between your fingers, judging moisture and texture with an instinct built over years. Tools lean nearby, worn smooth where hands have gripped them thousands of times. Each one has a specific purpose, and using the wrong tool wastes energy you cannot spare. If you live in town, your labour might take a different shape. You could be apprenticed to a trade learning through repetition rather than explanation. A blacksmith shop greets you with heat and ringing sound. A cooper's yard smells of wood and sap. Shops open early because daylight is the most reliable resource you have. When the sun is gone, work becomes slower and riskier. One broadly accepted conclusion drawn from economic records is that most people in 1776, America worked far more hours than a modern schedule would allow. The concept of an 8-hour workday does not exist. Instead, labour expands or contracts with the season. Summer days stretch long and demanding. Winter shortens tasks but adds new challenges. You notice how quickly your body settles into motion. Muscles warm, breath finds a rhythm. Pain exists, but it is familiar. It does not surprise you. Everyone carries small injuries, sore joints, and old strains. You work around them instinctively, adjusting posture without conscious thought. There is a sharp distinction between types of labour, but little illusion about their value. Skilled trades earn respect, but physical work earns survival. If you fail to contribute, you feel it immediately in how others respond. Usefulness is social currency. Enslaved people experience this reality in its harshest form. Their work begins early and ends late, controlled by others and enforced by threat. For them, labour is not just necessity, but domination. You see it in how they move quickly, efficiently, often silently. Their skills are real even when denied recognition. Children work alongside adults. Small hands fetch water, gather fuel, scare birds from crops, or mind younger siblings. Learning happens through doing. Mistakes are corrected quickly, sometimes gently, sometimes not. Childhood here is not protected space. It is preparation. An interesting observation from household accounts reveals that people often measured time by tasks rather than hours. You know it is mid-morning because certain chores are finished. Noon arrives when the sun reaches a familiar angle and stomachs signal the need for another meal. Time is embodied. There is active debate among historians about how people mentally experience this constant labour. Some argue it created a sense of stability and purpose. Others suggest it limited imagination and personal freedom. The truth likely varies by individuals, shaped by temperament and circumstance. You pause briefly to wipe sweat from your brow. Cloth darkens where moisture gathers. The smell of your own effort rises sharp but honest. No one remarks on it. Everyone smells like work. Cleanliness is judged at day's end, not in the middle of labour. Tools are shared, borrowed, repaired. A broken handle is fixed rather than replaced. You take care of what you own because loss is expensive. There is pride in maintaining equipment and keeping things functional beyond their expected life. A lesser-known detail appears in some workshop rules. Singing while working is discouraged in certain trades, not for moral reasons, but because it distracts from precision. In others, rhythmic sound is encouraged to keep pace. Work shapes culture in small, specific ways. As the morning progresses, you feel hunger again, but it is distant. Your body knows another pause will come later. For now, movement matters more. Focus narrows to the task in front of you. Conversation during work is brief and purposeful. Advice is given quickly. Stories are shared only when hands are busy and minds can wander without consequence. Silence is not awkward. It simply means attention is focused. You look around and see the same pattern repeated everywhere. People bent over tasks, absorbed, moving with efficiency learned through necessity. This is not a society waiting for something to happen. It is one constantly in motion. By the time the sun climbs higher, work has already left its mark. Dirt under nails, heat in muscles, a quiet satisfaction in progress made. You straighten for a moment, stretching your back and glance toward where the day will carry you next. Labour here is not something you finish. It is something you inhabit. As you step back into motion, you understand that work is not interrupting life. It is life steady and unavoidable, carrying you forward through another ordinary day in 1776 America. As the morning stretches on, you begin to notice a kind of labour that never seems to end because it is rarely acknowledged as finished. Women's work does not announce itself with noise or visible results in the same way fieldwork or trades do. Instead, it weaves quietly through every hour, holding the household together without pause. You watch as tasks overlap and repeat. Food preparation continues long after breakfast, with dough mixed for later meals and ingredients preserved for weeks ahead. Clothing is mended while watching children. Floors are swept not because they stay clean, but because dirt returns constantly. Every action seems small on its own. Together they consume the entire day. Records from the period leave little doubt that women's labour formed the backbone of household survival. Without it, families would unravel quickly, yet this work rarely appears in official documents. It is invisible precisely because it is assumed. You sense how skill develops through repetition. Hands move quickly, efficiently, without wasted motion. There is little instruction, because knowledge passes through observation. Girls learn by watching, then doing. Boys absorb it too, even if their future work will look different. Domestic competence is not optional. Time feels different here. Tasks do not begin and end cleanly. They circle back on themselves. Laundry waits for weather. Meals wait for fire. Children wait for attention that must be given in fragments. You feel pulled in several directions at once, always aware of what needs doing next. One easily overlooked habit appears in household correspondence. Women often rose earlier and slept later than others, not from virtue but necessity. Quiet moments before and after the household stirred were the only times certain tasks could be completed without interruption. There is disagreement among modern historians about how women themselves perceived this constant labour. Some argue it offered a sense of authority within the household. Others suggest it left little room for rest or self-definition beyond service. What emerges most clearly is complexity rather than simplicity. You notice how social expectations shape movement. Women circulate through spaces rarely settling. Even when sitting hands remain busy. Idleness invites judgment. Industry signals respectability. Tools of this labour are humble, needles worn smooth, pots darkened by use, brooms made from bundled twigs. These objects rarely survive long enough to be preserved, yet they shape daily experience more than anything displayed in museums. A small but telling behaviour shows up in account books. Women tracked household resources with precision, noting how much flour remained, how long soap lasted when fabric needed replacing. This quiet management often determined whether families weathered shortages or fell into debt. You feel the emotional weight of responsibility layered on top of physical work, caring for the sick, calming the frightened, mediating disputes. These tasks leave no visible product, yet they drain energy all the same. There is also creativity here, though it hides in practicality. Recipes vary by region and season. Clothing styles adapt to available materials. Songs are sung softly during work, not for performance, but to mark time and ease effort. The boundary between paid and unpaid labour blurs. Some women take in washing or sewing, for others folding commerce into domestic routine. Money earned this way is modest but crucial. It fills gaps that formal wages cannot. As midday approaches, you sense no clear transition. The work simply shifts shape. A pot is moved. A child is redirected. Fabric is folded. Everything continues. You realise that women's labour is not separate from the world you've been moving through. It supports it, cushions it, and makes it possible. Without these constant unremarked actions, nothing else functions. As you move on, carrying this awareness with you, the day feels fuller, heavier, and more interconnected. The quiet endurance you have witnessed becomes part of the rhythm of 1776, America steady and unbroken. Children are everywhere, moving through the day like smaller shadows of the adults around them. You notice them not because they are loud, but because they are always in motion. Childhood in 1776. America is not a protected stage set apart from responsibility. It is a gradual entry into usefulness measured not by age but by ability. You see a young child carrying a small bucket, water sloshing carefully inside. Another gathers kindling, selecting pieces light enough to lift but dry enough to burn. These tasks are not assigned ceremoniously. They are learned through watching, then doing, then being corrected. Instruction is brief. Expectation is constant. Surviving family records make it clear that children were expected to contribute meaningfully as soon as they were able. By the age of 5 or 6, most are already helping in small but regular ways. By 10 or 12, many are working hours that would feel demanding even to adults today. Play exists, but it fits around work rather than replacing it. You notice games unfolding in stolen moments. A stick becomes a toy sword. A hoop is rolled along the road with focused delight. Laughter erupts briefly, then fades as someone calls a name or points toward a waiting task. Joy is quick, bright, and unplanned. Education happens unevenly. In some towns, schools operate for a part of the year, often only when agricultural demands lessen. Reading is valued especially for religious reasons, but writing and arithmetic are less universal. Learning often takes place at home, guided by whoever has time and knowledge to spare. There is ongoing disagreement among scholars about how widespread formal schooling truly was in rural areas. Some evidence suggests attendance was sporadic and inconsistent. Other sources imply a stronger culture of informal literacy than previously assumed. What remains certain is that education bends around labour, not the other way around. You watch children absorb adult conversation without comment. They hear discussions of money, illness, weather, and conflict. Nothing is simplified for their benefit. Understanding comes gradually shaped by exposure rather than explanation. One revealing detail appears in apprenticeship contracts. Children as young as 7 were sometimes legally bound to masters learning trades in exchange for food, shelter, and training. Families often saw this not as loss, but as opportunity. Survival depended on placing children where they could eventually support themselves. Clothing marks this transition clearly. Young children wear loose, simple garments that allow growth. As they age, clothing becomes more structured, signalling readiness for responsibility. There is little room for rebellion when garments themselves limit movement into adult patterns. Discipline is present and direct. Mistakes are corrected quickly. Patience exists, but it is practical rather than indulgent. A dropped bucket means wasted water. A forgotten chore affects the whole household. Consequences feel immediate and real. You notice how closely children observe adults. They mimic posture language and habits. Skills are passed down not through instruction manuals but through proximity. The rhythm of work becomes internalized early, shaping identity long before adolescence. A quietly surprising note appears in some diaries. Parents expressed pride not in children's happiness but in their competence. Praise often followed evidence of reliability rather than creativity. This does not mean affection was absent. It simply took a different shape. There remains uncertainty among historians about how children emotionally experienced this early responsibility. Some argue it fostered resilience and confidence. Others suggest it limited play and emotional exploration. Both interpretations find support in personal accounts, reminding you that childhood then as now was not a single experience. As midday approaches, you see children adjusting easily to the pace of the day. They slow when adults slow. They speed up when urgency rises. They learn when to speak and when to stay quiet. You realize that childhood here is not something you pass through quickly. It blends gradually into adulthood, marked by increasing capability rather than sudden change. There is no clear line, only a steady accumulation of skill and expectation. As you move on, the presence of children lingers. Their quiet competence, their brief laughter, their serious attention to small tasks all contribute to the fabric of daily life. They are not future participants. They are already here shaping the world of 17 to 76 America alongside everyone else. As the day edges toward its middle, movement pulls you toward places where exchange happens. Markets, shops, and small points of trade do not exist as separate destinations. They are woven into the paths people already walk. You do not go shopping so much as you pass through moments where goods change hands. You arrive at a cluster of stalls and doorways that feel informal but purposeful. Goods are displayed simply. Barrels stand open. Baskets sit within reach. Items are arranged so they can be inspected by touch rather than admired from a distance. Nothing here is sealed, wrapped, or hidden behind glass. Surviving town records show that most trade in 1776 America occurred on a very small scale. Large merchants existed, especially in port cities, but everyday life depended on local exchange. You know who made the shoes you wear. You know who milled the grain in your bread. Trust is built through repetition rather than contracts. You pause near a stall where dried goods are measured out carefully. Scales are used, but often the seller's eye does the work. Reputation matters. Shorting a neighbour risks more than one bad transaction. It risks social standing. Money appears, but not as often as you might expect. Coins pass from hand to hand, worn smooth, their markings sometimes barely visible. Spanish silver circulates freely alongside British currency. Value is understood more by weight than by face. Still, many exchanges do not involve money at all. One quietly consistent detail in account books is the reliance on barter and credit. You promise payment later. You settle accounts after harvest. You trade labour for goods. This system works only because people expect to see one another again. There remains lively debate among economic historians about how stable this credit-based system truly was. Some argue it created resilience, allowing communities to function despite shortages of cash. Others point out that it also created tension dependency and quiet resentment when debt stretched too long. Both views surface in personal letters filled with gratitude one moment and anxiety the next. You notice how conversation flows during trade. News travels alongside goods. Someone mentions a sick relative. Someone else asks about the weather upriver. Information is as valuable as anything on display. Markets function as social centres as much as economic ones. Shops that operate indoors feel different. A tailor's space smells of cloth and chalk. A cooper's shop is loud with mallets and rings. These places invite you to linger just long enough to place an order or collect something finished. There is no browsing in the modern sense. You come with a purpose. A small but revealing habit shows up in merchant correspondence. Shopkeepers often kept mental ledgers alongside written ones, remembering customers by face and history. Forgetting who owed what was not just a mistake, it was a social failure. You sense how access shapes experience. Women participate actively in markets, especially for household goods. Enslaved people may be sent to purchase items carrying messages as well as money. Children trail behind, absorbing the mechanics of exchange early. Quality matters more than novelty. You handle items carefully, feeling for flaws. Returning a purchase is rare and awkward. You choose slowly because mistakes are costly. Smells gather here. Leather-grain fish, smoke, and human presence blend together. It is not unpleasant, just dense. The air feels used. Voices overlap without shouting. There is an unspoken rhythm to negotiation that you follow instinctively. Some regions hold regular market days. Others rely on informal exchange whenever paths cross. Either way, trade is embedded in daily movement. You do not step out of life to acquire things. Acquisition is part of living. A passing remark in a traveller's journal notes surprise at how little advertising existed. Signs were simple. Word of mouth did the rest. You found what you needed by knowing where to look and who to ask. As you finish your small business, whether trading, purchasing, or simply listening, you feel the subtle satisfaction of connection. Needs have been met, information gathered, relationships reinforced. You turn away goods in hand or promises made and fold back into the day's flow. The market does not close so much as dissolve, each person carrying its effects with them. Trade here leaves no sharp boundary. It simply fades back into ordinary movement, sustaining life in 1776 America, one small exchange at a time. By now you've handled goods, exchanged words, and promised things that will be settled later. That is when you begin to notice something quietly unsettling. Actual money is strangely absent. Coins appear and disappear, but they never seem to linger long in anyone's pocket, including yours. You reach instinctively for payment and hesitate. A few pieces of silver sit heavy in your hand, worn so smooth. Their markings feel almost decorative rather than official. They are valuable, yet everyone treats them cautiously, as if they might vanish the moment they are spent, and often they do. Personal account books from the period make one thing unmistakably clear. Cash is scarce. Even people considered comfortable often operate with little hard currency. Wealth here does not sit in wallets. It lives in land tools, animal-stored goods, and reputation. Money is useful, but it is not the foundation of daily exchange. You sense this immediately in how people speak. Instead of prices, you hear terms like "owed due settled after harvest" or "put it on account." These phrases flow easily without embarrassment. Credit is not failure, it is infrastructure. You promise to pay later, and the promise is accepted not because of a signature, but because you are known. Your character functions as collateral. This makes honesty more than a virtue. It makes it necessary. Coins themselves come from many places. British pounds circulate, but so do Spanish dollars, Dutch coins, and local issues of varying quality. Value is judged by weight and metal content rather than by face. You learn quickly which pieces are trusted and which raise suspicion. One small but revealing detail appears in merchant correspondence. Shopkeepers sometimes bit coins lightly to test softness, a quick check for debased metal. It's not theatrical, it is practical. Trust is layered, not blind. You notice how people delay spending cash whenever possible. Coins are saved for taxes, large purchases, or emergencies. Everyday needs are handled through trade or credit. This creates a web of obligations that binds the community together, sometimes uncomfortably. Modern economic historians do not fully agree on whether this system made people more secure or more anxious. Some argue that mutual dependence strengthened social bonds. Others suggest it trapped families in cycles of debt that were difficult to escape. Both interpretations surface in surviving letters that swing between gratitude and quiet worry. You feel the tension yourself. Credit allows you to function despite scarcity, but it also means you're never entirely finished. Something is always owed. Even after a good harvest, accounts must be settled carefully to avoid damaging trust. Taxes complicate everything. Colonial and local levies are often demanded in specific forms, sometimes requiring cash rather than goods. This forces people into difficult choices, selling produce or labour at inconvenient times to meet obligations. Money becomes most visible when authority demands it. A detail tucked into town meeting notes reveals that disputes over payment were common but often resolved informally. Elders or respected neighbours mediated disagreements. Legal action existed, but it was costly and slow. Social pressure usually worked faster. You become aware that money changes relationships. Lending or borrowing can shift balance subtly. Gratitude mixes with resentment. Generosity is remembered. Stinginess lingers. Every transaction carries emotional weight alongside economic value. Women play a significant role in this system, managing household accounts and tracking who owes what. Their memory often serves as the true ledger. Enslaved people, meanwhile, exist outside the system, entirely treated as property rather than participants, their labour generating wealth they cannot claim. Children absorb these lessons early. They hear discussions of debt and payment without explanation. They learn that promises matter. Breaking one carries consequences that echo. There remains uncertainty among scholars about how people mentally categorized money itself. Some evidence suggests it was seen as unstable and even morally suspect, while tangible goods felt safer. Other sources imply a growing familiarity with cash, especially in port cities. Experience varied widely by region. As the day moves on, you tuck your few coins away carefully. They clink softly, a sound that draws attention. You become conscious of how visible money feels when it is rare. Spending it requires thought. You realize that the absence of money does not slow life, it simply reshapes it. Exchange becomes personal, obligation becomes social, trust becomes currency. When you leave the space of trade and return to work or home, the promises you have made travel with you. They sit quietly in your mind, reminders that life here is not balanced by numbers alone. Money may be scarce, but connection is not. Every agreement ties you more tightly into the fabric of the community. As you move forward, you carry not just goods or tools, but relationships, expectations, and the quiet understanding that in 1776 America wealth is measured as much by who knows you as by what you own. By the time the day settles into its steady middle, hunger returns quieter than the morning but more persistent. Food here does not arrive in neat courses or planned menus. It emerges from what has already been prepared, preserved, or held back with intention. You eat what the season allows and what foresight has made possible. Meals beyond breakfast rely heavily on planning done weeks or months earlier. Meat, when available, is salted, smoked, or dried. Vegetables appear fresh only briefly, then return in altered forms. Beans harden and are soaked patiently. Apples become slices, cider, or vinegar. Nothing is accidental. Every bite represents earlier labour. From kitchen records and farm journals, a clear pattern emerges. Diets are repetitive by design. Familiar food reduces waste and uncertainty. Variety exists, but it follows the calendar, not desire. You know when something will appear again, and that knowledge itself is comforting. You sit or stand where space allows eating when the work briefly pauses. This meal might be eaten outdoors, leaning against a fence, or stump food balanced in one hand. Plates are optional. Bread often serves as its own container. Grease soaks in, adding flavour and calories. You taste salt immediately. It is present in nearly everything, not as seasoning but preservation. Salted pork, salted fish, salted butter. Your body craves it after sweating through labour. Thirst follows quickly and you drink what is safe. Cider, small beer, or watered-down ale appear again. Water is used cautiously unless its source is trusted. An overlooked habit appears in household notes. People often dipped vegetables or bread into fat saved from earlier meals. Nothing rich was wasted. Fat carried energy through long afternoons, and even a small amount transformed simple food into something sustaining. You notice how little food is discussed as pleasure. Satisfaction comes from fullness, not indulgence. Still moments of enjoyment slip in. A well-smoked piece of meat, a fresh onion sliced thin, a crust that crackles just right. These moments stand out precisely because they are not guaranteed. There is ongoing disagreement among modern scholars about nutritional balance in colonial diets. Some argue that despite monotony, people consume sufficient calories and nutrients through whole foods. Others point to deficiencies during harsh seasons or poor harvests. The truth shifts year by year, household by household. You feel the meal settle slowly rather than rush. There is no sugar spike. Energy spreads evenly, preparing you for more work. You wipe your hands on cloth already marked by earlier meals. Stains accumulate without comment. Food storage shapes daily thinking. Root cellars stay cool and damp. Shelves hold jars sealed with wax or cloth. Barrels line walls, each containing something precious. You know what remains without checking constantly. Inventory lives in memory. Children eat alongside adults, portions adjusted by need rather than age. No one is urged to clear a plate. Waste is discouraged quietly. Hunger later is a better teacher than scolding. A detail preserved in a traveller's account mentions surprise at how rarely people snacked between meals. Eating is purposeful, not constant. Food is paused, not grazed. As the meal ends, remnants are gathered immediately. Bones saved for broth. Crumbs for animals. Liquid poured carefully back into storage. Nothing lingers on the table. The act of eating folds seamlessly back into labour. You stand again, feeling neither heavy nor light, just capable. The rhythm continues. Work resumes. The body knows how to use what it has been given. As you move forward into the afternoon, the memory of food stays with you not as pleasure but as quiet assurance. You are fueled enough to continue. That is all the day requires. In this world, food is not about choice or novelty. It's about continuity. Each meal ties you to the season, the land, and the work that made it possible. And as you step back into motion, you carry that steady nourishment with you, another small thread in the fabric of everyday life in 1776 America. As afternoon advances, your awareness shifts to things people rarely discuss unless they fail. Water waste and cleanliness shape every hour, even when no one names them directly. You feel it in small decisions, in where you step, what you touch, and how often you wash your hands or do not. Water defines the limits of comfort. You fetch it repeatedly each trip, reminding you that every drop has a cost. Wells, pumps, streams, or rain barrels provide what you need, but none are effortless. Buckets strain arms and backs. Spills matter. You learn to move carefully, balancing weight with practiced ease. Period household manuals quietly confirm that most families used far less water than a modern person would expect. Washing is selective. Hands and faces receive attention. Clothes are washed only when truly necessary. Full bathing is rare, not from neglect, but from logistics. Heating water requires fuel. Fuel requires labour. You smell the environment more keenly here. Earth animals, smoke, and human presence mix together without apology. Waste is managed close to home. Chamber pots are emptied daily, often into privies or designated areas away from wells. The process is routine, not shameful. Everyone knows it must be done. One revealing note in town ordinances mentions fines for dumping waste too near public paths. Cleanliness is not about sterility. It is about preventing obvious danger. Smell alone is not considered a problem unless it signals disease or threatens water sources. You notice how people develop an instinct for safe water. Some sources are trusted, others are avoided without explanation. Experience teaches quickly. Illness follows contaminated water and memory does the rest. You drink carefully, preferring what has been boiled or fermented when possible. There remains uncertainty among modern researchers about how effective these practices truly were at preventing disease. Some evidence suggests communities adapted surprisingly well. Other records point to frequent outbreaks of illness tied directly to sanitation failures. The balance likely depended on local geography and habit. Soap exists, but it is homemade and used sparingly. Lye soap cleans aggressively, stripping skin as well as dirt. You rinse quickly, avoiding overuse. Cleanliness here is functional, enough to prevent sickness, enough to keep clothes wearable. Laundry days are long and physically demanding. Water is heated, hauled, reused, then discarded. Clothes are scrubbed against boards or stones. Drying depends entirely on weather. You plan washing around forecasts because damp fabric left too long can sour and ruin hours of work. A small detail tucked into letters between friends reveals complaints about the smell of wet wool hanging indoors during winter. It lingered for days, heavy and unavoidable. People endured it because alternatives were limited. You adjust your movements instinctively to avoid filth. You step around puddles whose origins you do not question. You watch where animals pass. You wipe hands on cloth rather than reaching immediately for water. These habits form early and stay with you. Children learn quickly as well. They are corrected sharply when they stray too close to waste areas or play near questionable water. Fear is practical. Illness strikes hardest among the young and everyone knows it. Despite all this, the environment feels alive rather than dirty. Nature absorbs much of what humans produce. Soil takes waste. Animals consume scraps. Smoke disperses. The system is imperfect, but it functions well enough to sustain life. An understated observation from a visiting European noted surprise at how little people complained about smells. What overwhelmed outsiders barely registered for residents. The nose adapts just like everything else. As the afternoon continues, you rinse your hands once more, shaking off droplets before returning to work. The water feels cool and grounding, clean enough. That phrase carries meaning here. You realize that health in this world depends less on perfection than on awareness. Knowing where danger lies, knowing when to act, knowing when to accept what cannot be changed. As you step forward, you carry this understanding with you. Cleanliness is not invisible labor. It is constant attention woven quietly into daily life. You do not think about it often, but it shapes everything you touch, every sip you take, and every step you place. In the ordinary grounded world of 1776 America, illness does not arrive dramatically. It slips in quietly, announced first by a heaviness in the limbs or a warmth that feels slightly wrong. As the afternoon wears on, you become more aware of how fragile the body feels in this world. Health is not assumed. It is watched, negotiated, and often worried over. When someone falls sick, the household responds immediately. There's no clinic to visit, no professional guarantee to appear. Care begins at home, guided by memory, tradition, and whatever remedies are within reach. You recognize the smell of herbs steeping in hot water. Bitter, sharp, and earthy. Comforting simply because they are familiar. The common understanding passed down through generations is that balance matters. Heat and cold, wet and dry, rest and exertion. Illness is thought to come from imbalance rather than invasion. Treatments aim to restore harmony, not to attack a cause you cannot see. You feel a hand press against a forehead, gauging temperature by touch alone. Fever is judged comparatively. Hotter than yesterday, cooler than this morning. Improvement or decline is measured in small shifts. There are no numbers to reassure or alarm you. Household medical knowledge is extensive, especially among women. They know which plants soothe stomachs, which ease coughs, which calm nerves. This knowledge is practical, earned through repetition and observation. Remedies are adjusted quietly when something does not work. Surviving notebooks and recipe collections make it evident that home medicine was not fringe practice. It was primary care. Physicians exist, but they are expensive, distant, and not always trusted. You call one only when the situation feels beyond household control. One revealing habit appears in personal correspondence. People often delayed seeking outside help, hoping the body would correct itself, not from stubbornness but from experience. Many ailments passed on their own. Intervention carried risks. Bloodletting, purging, and blistering are known practices accepted by many as standard treatment. You watch, with a mixture of faith and fear as these methods are considered. Relief sometimes follows, other times weakness deepens. Outcomes vary and everyone knows it. There is no clear consensus among modern historians about how effective these treatments truly were. Some argue they occasionally helped by chance or placebo. Others suggest they often worsened conditions. The records show both recoveries and tragedies, sometimes following the same approach. Children are watched closely. Their illnesses progress quickly. Parents listen to breathing, count hours of sleep, note appetite. Fear is constant but controlled. Panic serves no purpose. Death is never far from thought, even when health is good. It lingers as possibility shaping caution. You avoid cold drafts. You rest when you can. You eat when food is offered. These habits are not indulgence. They are survival strategies. An understated detail appears in a minister's journal. He notes how often illness was interpreted as moral or spiritual signal, especially during epidemics. Reflection accompanied treatment. Prayer existed alongside poultices without contradiction. Despite limited tools, care is attentive. Someone sits nearby through the night. Water is offered often. Comfort is given freely. Touch matters. Presence matters. When recovery comes, it feels gradual. Strength returns slowly like light after a long dusk. The household exhales not loudly but deeply. Gratitude replaces fear without ceremony. You realize that health here is not an individual experience. It belongs to the group. One person's illness disrupts everyone's routine. One recovery restores balance. As you move back into the afternoon, the awareness stays with you. Every ache is noticed. Every breath is appreciated. Wellness feels temporary, not guaranteed. In this world, medicine is woven into daily life, shaped by hope, habit, and shared knowledge. You carry that understanding forward, knowing that staying well in 1776, America depends as much on care and caution as on luck, and that every ordinary day lived without illness is quietly celebrated. As the afternoon light begins to soften your steps, carry you toward a space that feels quieter without being empty. Faith here is not something reserved for a single hour or a single building. It threads itself through the day in habits so familiar they barely register as belief anymore. You sense it in the way people pause before eating even briefly, in the phrases woven into ordinary speech, in the expectation that life unfolds under some larger order, whether named often or rarely. Religion here is not always loud. It is steady. Church buildings exist simple and unadorned compared to what you might expect. Benches are hard, windows are plain. The focus is not on beauty but on gathering. When people attend, they do so because it anchors the week marking time as much as offering guidance. Personal journals and community records consistently show that religious attendance was one of the few truly communal routines shared across classes. Wealth and poverty sat side by side, at least in theory. The same words were spoken to everyone, even if they landed differently. Sermons are long by modern standards. Attention is expected, not optional. You listen not only for moral instruction, but for reassurance that hardship has meaning. Faith provides a framework that helps explain suffering without resolving it. Outside formal worship belief appears in smaller ways. A whispered prayer during illness, a reference to providence when plans succeed or fail. These moments are not dramatic, they are reflexive. A small but telling habit shows up in letters between friends. People often asked one another to remember them in prayer, especially during uncertain times. This request carried real comfort, reinforcing a sense of being held within a larger community. There is no single religious experience. Congregations differ, interpretations vary. Some emphasize discipline and restraint, others focus on mercy and inner reflection. Arguments happen, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly, shaping divisions that feel personal rather than abstract. Modern scholarship remains divided on how deeply individual belief motivated daily behavior versus how much religion functioned as social expectation. Evidence supports both views. For some, faith was intimate and guiding. For others, participation maintained belonging more than conviction. You notice how children absorb religious language early, repeating phrases without fully understanding them. Meaning accumulates, slowly layered over years of listening and repetition. Faith also shapes moral boundaries. Reputation matters deeply. Public behavior reflects not just on you, but on your household. Shame carries weight. Forgiveness does too, though it often requires visible repentance. An offhand remark preserved in a traveller's diary notes surprise at how rarely people openly questioned belief even when doubt existed. Questions were often private, worked through internally or with trusted companions rather than aired publicly. As evening approaches, religious routine blends seamlessly into daily rhythm. There's no sharp transition. Faith does not interrupt life. It accompanies it. You feel how this presence steadies people, offering language for hope and patience. In a world filled with uncertainty, belief provides something firm to lean against, even if it never answers everything. As you move on, the quiet influence of faith lingers, not as doctrine, but as habit, as reassurance, as a shared understanding that whatever the day has demanded, it exists within a story larger than any single person. In 1776, American religion is less about spectacle and more about continuity. It flows gently beneath daily life, shaping choices, easing fear, and reminding you that endurance itself can be an act of faith. By late afternoon, the pace of the day loosens slightly, not because work is finished, but because bodies and minds begin to feel the weight of hours already spent. This is when small pockets of leisure appear, not planned or announced, but discovered almost accidentally between obligations. You notice it in the way someone lingers a moment longer than necessary after completing a task, in the way voices soften, in the brief pause where no one immediately reaches for the next chore. Leisure here is not a destination. It is a breath. Games emerge quickly and vanish just as fast. Cards are shuffled, played on rough surfaces, then tucked away. Dice roll across a table, the sound sharp and satisfying. Stakes are modest, often symbolic. Winning brings bragging rights more than wealth. Losing brings laughter or mild annoyance, never outrage. Surviving descriptions of daily life suggest that storytelling was among the most common forms of entertainment. You listen as someone recounts an event from years ago, details shifting slightly with each telling. Accuracy matters less than rhythm. Stories are shared to pass time, to teach lessons, or simply to connect. Music appears without ceremony. A fiddle emerges. A tune begins. Feet tap without conscious decision. Songs are familiar, passed down rather than composed. Singing's communal. Talent is appreciated, but participation matters more. There is an enduring question among historians about how much leisure people truly experienced. Some argue these moments were rare and fleeting. Others believe that regular pauses existed woven naturally into work rhythms. What seems certain is that leisure was not passive. It required presence. You feel how different this is from modern rest. There is no escape into distraction. Leisure happens face to face, sound to sound. Silence itself can be leisure when shared. A small but revealing detail surfaces in diary entries. People often describe these moments not as entertainment, but as relief. Relief from worry, relief from repetition, relief from isolation. The language matters. Leisure here is restorative rather than indulgent. Children join easily shifting from play to chores and back again. Adults watch, sometimes smiling, sometimes offering correction, even in moments of rest. Teaching never fully stops. Religious restrictions shape leisure subtly. Certain games or activities are discouraged on specific days. This does not eliminate pleasure, it redirects it. Walking conversation and quiet reflection become acceptable alternatives. You notice how weather influences everything. A clear evening invites gathering outdoors. A cold or wet one drives people closer together indoors. Space determines activity. Narrow rooms encourage conversation. Open yards invite movement. An offhand comment preserved in a letter mentions missing these small moments while travelling. Work could be found anywhere. Familiar leisure could not. This reveals how tied enjoyment was to community rather than activity. As dusk approaches, leisure fades without resistance. No one clings to it. There is understanding that rest has limits. Evening brings its own demands. You stand and stretch, feeling muscles loosen slightly. Laughter lingers in the air for a moment, then dissolves. Tools are picked up again. Animals need tending. Fires need attention. What stays with you is not the activity itself, but the feeling of shared presence. Leisure here confirms belonging. It reminds you that even in a life shaped by necessity, there is room for connection. As you move back into work or preparation for evening, you carry that quiet warmth with you. It does not last long, but it does not need to. Its value lies in its brevity. In 1776, America leisure does not promise escape. It offers grounding. It reminds you that endurance is easier when shared, and that even the busiest days contain moments where life feels briefly gently balanced. As afternoon gives way to early evening, you begin to sense a subtle shift in how people carry themselves. Voices lower slightly, movements slow. Attention turns outward, not toward tools or tasks, but toward information. This is the hour when news drifts in, rarely announced, often overheard. There is no headline waiting for you. News arrives by foot, by horse, by letter, passed from hand to hand. You hear it first as rumour. Someone mentions a price change upriver. Someone else repeats a story heard from a traveller 2 days ago. Accuracy is uncertain, but relevance is immediate. You listen carefully, weighing tone as much as content. What everyday correspondence consistently shows is that most people relied almost entirely on spoken networks for information. Newspapers exist, but they circulate slowly and unevenly. Many households never see one at all. Even when papers are available, they're often read aloud, shared, discussed, and argued over collectively. You watch how people assess what they hear. Who said it matters? Where it came from matters. News from a trusted neighbour carries more weight than news from a stranger passing through. Credibility is personal, built over time. Letters are prized objects. When one arrives, it is handled with care. The paper itself feels valuable. Ink has bled slightly. Words are compact, written to conserve space. You notice how a letter gathers people around it, how listening becomes a shared act. An easily missed habit appears in family accounts. Letters are often reread months or years later, not for updates, but for connection. News ages quickly. Relationship does not. You sense how geography shapes awareness. People know a great deal about what happens nearby and very little about distant events, unless those events affect trade safety or family. Distance is measured not in miles, but in effort. A place 3 days away feels far. A place 3 weeks away feels almost unreal. There is no single moment when political ideas interrupt daily life. They seep in gradually. A comment made while resting, a remark repeated during supper. Opinions form slowly, shaped by trust and repetition, rather than sudden revelation. The historical record leaves room for competing conclusions about how informed the average person truly was. Some evidence suggests a surprisingly high level of engagement with current events. Other sources imply that news was filtered heavily through local concerns, leaving broader issues vague. Both realities likely existed side by side. You notice how emotion colours information. Fear sharpens attention. Hope spreads quickly. Bad news is sometimes softened in retelling not from dishonesty, but from kindness. People protect one another from worry when they can. A small human moment preserved in a traveller's journal mentions hearing the same story told 3 times in one day, each version slightly altered. This is not error, it is adaptation. Stories shift to fit the listener. Children listen too often, pretending not to. They absorb fragments, piecing together meaning later. Adults do not shield them completely. Life does not pause for innocence. As evening approaches, news slows. Those who are travelling push on or settle in for the night. Conversations turn inward again. What has been learned is carried home, discussed quietly, sometimes argued over, sometimes set aside. You realise that information here is not consumed, it is digested. It becomes part of the social fabric, influencing decisions slowly, rather than provoking immediate reaction. As you step away from the gathering voices and return toward home or hearth, the echoes of what you have heard follow you, not as certainty, but as possibility. In 1776, American knowledge moves at walking speed. It arrives shaped by people, place and purpose. You carry it with you, carefully aware that tomorrow it may change again just as quietly as it arrived. As the light tilts lower and stretches shadows across the ground, politics begin to surface in a way that feels almost accidental. No one gathers formally to debate ideas. Instead, opinions slip into conversation, while hands are busy and attention is divided. You hear them as background noise rather than declarations. Someone mentions a new regulation not by name but by effect. A tax that makes a tool harder to replace. A rule that complicates trade. These ideas are discussed practically, not philosophically. You listen as people evaluate what changes mean for daily survival, rather than abstract principle. From letters and meeting notes that survive, it becomes apparent that political awareness often grew out of irritation before conviction. People noticed disruption first. Ideology followed later, if at all. Politics entered life through inconvenience. You sense how uneven engagement is. Some speak confidently, quoting pamphlets or sermons they have heard repeated. Others listen quietly, absorbing without responding. Silence does not mean indifference. It often means caution. The word freedom is used sparingly, almost carefully. It does not yet carry a single definition. For some, it refers to economic independence. For others, it means protection from arbitrary authority. Meanings overlap, but do not always align. An understated detail in town meeting minutes reveals that attendance varied widely. The same names appear again and again, suggesting a small core of engaged participants. Many others stayed away not from apathy but from lack of time or trust in the process. There is no shared assumption that politics will improve life quickly. Change feels slow and uncertain. Risk is real. Speaking openly carries consequences depending on where you live and who listens. Researchers examining personal writings still disagree on how deeply revolutionary ideas penetrated everyday thought in 1776. Some argue they were pervasive, shaping conversations everywhere. Others find evidence that many people remained focused on local concerns, treating larger movements as distant and abstract. The record supports both readings. You notice how political talk often ends abruptly. Someone remembers a task left undone. Someone else grows uncomfortable. Conversation redirects without confrontation. Survival demands focus. Children overhear fragments without context. Phrases lodge in memory to be understood later. Adults rarely explain. Politics is something you grow into, not something you are taught directly. A passing comment in a farmer's diary notes frustration at being asked to choose sides when daily life already felt demanding enough. This captures a common sentiment. Alignment requires energy many feel they cannot spare. As evening approaches, political discussion fades naturally. Fires need tending. Animals need shelter. The immediate replaces the ideological. You realize that politics here is not a constant presence. It drifts in and out of awareness shaped by necessity rather than passion. It exists alongside work, not above it. As you move toward the next phase of the day, these conversations linger faintly unresolved and unfinished. Ideas have been introduced, not settled. Questions remain open. In 1776, America politics is not yet a full-time identity. It is a background hum, sometimes rising, sometimes fading, always secondary to the demands of getting through the day. And as you step forward, you carry that uncertainty with you, folded quietly into the fabric of ordinary life. As daylight thins and the sky softens toward evening, another feeling settles in, quieter than argument and heavier than opinion. It is uncertainty. Loyalty in 1776. America is not a banner you wave openly. It is something you carry carefully, adjusting it depending on who stands nearby. You hear people speak cautiously now. Words are chosen with more care. Conversations that drifted earlier now narrow. Eyes flick toward doorways. Familiar faces offer comfort, but unfamiliar ones invite restraint. It is not fear exactly. It is awareness. In many communities, allegiance is assumed rather than declared. You're known by where you live, who you trade with, who you worship beside. These details speak louder than statements. To declare too strongly risks misunderstanding. To remain silent risks suspicion. Balance matters. Surviving correspondence from this period quietly shows how divided households could be. Letters hint at disagreements held behind closed doors. One brother writes cautiously. Another avoids the topic altogether. Families navigate difference by avoiding confrontation when possible. You sense how dangerous clarity can be. Open support for one side or another may bring consequences. Supplies could become harder to obtain. Neighbours might withdraw trust. In extreme cases, property or safety could be threatened. The risk varies by region, but the awareness is widespread. A revealing note appears in a local record describing people who deliberately moved or travelled to avoid being pressed for declarations. Distance becomes a kind of shield. Silence becomes a strategy. There's no universal agreement among historians about how common this quiet avoidance truly was. Some evidence suggests most people eventually aligned openly. Other sources point to long periods of deliberate ambiguity, especially in areas where control shifted frequently. The lived experience likely changed from place to place. You notice how emotions are managed. Anger is softened, doubt is hidden, fear is rarely named. Instead, people speak of caution, prudence, and timing. These words signal unease without exposing it fully. Children sense tension without understanding it. They notice when voices drop. They feel when adults change subject. Questions go unanswered not from neglect, but from protection. A small detail preserved in a journal mentions someone refusing to hang a symbol on their door, choosing neutrality as long as possible. This decision carried weight. Absence became its own message. As evening deepens, these concerns retreat slightly. Night brings privacy. The household closes in on itself. Candles are lit, doors are secured. Conversation becomes more honest within trusted walls. You feel how loyalty here is layered rather than fixed. It is shaped by safety, family, livelihood, and belief, all pulling in different directions. Choice is rarely simple. As you prepare to move further into the evening, this sense of quiet calculation stays with you. You understand now that uncertainty is not weakness. It is adaptation. In this moment, in this fading light, loyalty remains unresolved, carried quietly from one day to the next. And as you step forward into the gathering dark, you do so with care, knowing that in 1776 America's survival often depends not on what you believe, but on when and where you choose to reveal it. As evening settles more firmly, your awareness is drawn to a reality that has been present all day but rarely spoken aloud. Slavery is not a separate system running alongside daily life. It is embedded within it, shaping routines, spaces and relationships so completely that many people barely remark on it anymore. You notice it first in movement. Enslaved people work continuously, often anticipating needs before they are voiced. They move quickly, efficiently, with an attentiveness born not of eagerness but necessity. Their labour supports households, farms, workshops and businesses, forming a foundation. Others stand on without acknowledgement. Everyday routines quietly reveal how normalised this presence has become. Tasks are assigned without explanation. Orders are given casually, sometimes without words at all. Silence itself becomes a language heavy with expectation. You sense how deeply this system has trained everyone within it. Work here takes many forms. Field labour is the most visible, backbreaking and relentless. Domestic work is constant and intimate, performed inside homes where boundaries blur. Skilled labour also appears. Blacksmithing, carpentry, cooking and childcare all rely on expertise developed through repetition and enforced learning. You feel the imbalance immediately. Labour produces value, but ownership of that value belongs elsewhere. Even moments of rest are regulated. Even family connections are fragile, subject to separation without warning. The weight of this reality presses quietly against the rhythm of the day. A detail slips through almost unintentionally in plantation inventories. Enslaved individuals are listed alongside tools and livestock valued in monetary terms that reduce human lives to entries on a page. The language is practical, efficient and devastating. At the same time, resistance exists everywhere, often subtle enough to escape notice. A task completed slowly. A tool misplaced. Knowledge withheld. These acts are small, but they carry risk. You sense the courage it takes to claim even a fragment of control. Some enslaved people negotiate space within the system. Skills provide leverage. Trusted positions offer limited protection. Gardens tended after dark supply food and moments of autonomy. Community forms quietly, often unseen by those who benefit most from the labour. The rhythm of ordinary life makes clear that slavery is not confined to one region, though its forms differ. In the south, large plantations dominate. In the north, enslaved people appear in homes, shops and ports, often fewer in number, but no less constrained. The system adapts to place. There is an unresolved tension in the historical record when it comes to daily interactions. Some sources describe moments of apparent familiarity between enslaved people and those who claim ownership. Other accounts reveal constant threat beneath the surface. The sources refuse to settle neatly into a single interpretation. You notice how children learn this reality early. They observe who commands and who obeys. They absorb hierarchy before they understand it. This learning happens without formal instruction. It simply exists. Religion is sometimes used to justify the system, sometimes to soften its edges. Enslaved people adapt belief to their own needs, finding meaning and hope where possible. Songs, stories, and shared rituals carry strength that cannot be measured or controlled. A small but oddly revealing habit shows up in personal letters. Owners often wrote about enslaved people's health or productivity, with concern not always from compassion, but from dependence. The system relies on bodies remaining functional. Care and control intertwine uncomfortably. Punishment exists as constant possibility. You sense it in posture, in the way eyes track movement, in the careful navigation of space. Fear does not always appear dramatic. Often it manifests as vigilance, and yet life continues within this constraint. Laughter appears, relationships form, love persists. These moments do not erase suffering, but they reveal humanity that refuses to be extinguished. Modern analysis pulls in different directions when trying to measure how enslaved people experience daily life emotionally. Some evidence emphasizes resilience and community. Other sources highlight trauma and loss. Both are present, coexisting within the same lived reality. As night approaches, work finally slows. Fires are banked. Tools are set aside. For some, rest arrives in shared quarters or small shelters. For others, even nighttime brings obligation. You carry this awareness forward as part of the day's weight. Slavery here is not an abstract institution. It is daily presence shaping who moves freely and who does not, who rests when tired, and who continues regardless. As darkness gathers, the injustice remains unspoken, yet undeniable. And as you step further into the evening of 1776, America, you understand that ordinary life is sustained by extraordinary suffering, woven so tightly into routine that many no longer see it, even as it surrounds them. As the sky deepens toward night, your awareness stretches beyond the boundaries of town and farm toward the land itself, and the people who lived upon it long before these routines took shape. Indigenous presence is not absent. It is everywhere, even when it is ignored, misnamed, or pushed to the edges of daily conversation. You notice it first in place names spoken casually without thought. Rivers, paths, clearings, and hills still carry words shaped by older languages. These names survive because they are useful. They describe the land accurately. They persist even as the people who coined them are forced aside. Daily life makes clear that indigenous knowledge continues to shape survival. Roots follow ancient trails. Crops grow in fields chosen long ago for soil and water. Hunting techniques, medicinal plants, and seasonal rhythms echo older systems of understanding. Much of this knowledge has been adopted without acknowledgement, treated as if it simply belongs to the land itself. Encounters vary by region. In some areas, indigenous communities remain nearby, trading goods, sharing space uneasily, negotiating presence day by day. In others, they have been pushed farther away, their absence marked by empty land that still feels watched, remembered. You hear people speak of them in the past tense even when they are not gone. Language does this work quietly. To speak as if someone no longer exists is a way of making it feel true. What people largely assume without questioning is that expansion is inevitable. Land is described as available, waiting, unused, even when its history contradicts that idea. Fields are measured. Boundaries are drawn. Ownership is claimed through paperwork rather than relationship. A small but telling moment appears in settler diaries. Writers often note indigenous visitors with curiosity rather than hostility, describing clothing posture and speech with careful detail. The tone is observational, sometimes respectful, sometimes dismissive. Rarely does it acknowledge shared humanity fully. Trade still occurs. Furs, food, and information move between communities, often out of necessity rather than goodwill. Trust is fragile. Agreements shift. Misunderstandings multiply easily when expectations differ. The picture becomes murkier when we try to determine how much awareness settlers had of the long-term consequences of their actions. Some sources suggest deliberate displacement. Others reveal a kind of willful blindness and ability to focus on immediate needs while ignoring broader impact. Both patterns appear side by side. You feel how conflict simmers beneath ordinary interaction. Stories of violence circulate, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes minimized. Fear travels faster than truth. It shapes behavior even in places where no direct encounter has occurred. Children absorb these narratives early. They learn which areas are considered safe, which are avoided, and why, though explanations are often vague. Caution is taught before understanding. At the same time, indigenous resilience remains visible. Communities adapt, move, resist, negotiate, and endure. Culture persists through language ceremony and shared memory. Even when land is lost, identity is not surrendered easily. An everyday habit hints at something deeper. Settlers often rely on indigenous guides for travel through unfamiliar terrain, trusting their knowledge while denying their claims. Dependence and denial exist together, uneasy and unresolved. Missionaries attempt conversion sometimes sincerely, sometimes strategically. Religious encounters bring both exchange and erasure. Belief becomes another contested space where power and identity collide. Later analysis has never fully reconciled whether daily coexistence made displacement feel less violent to those carrying it out, or whether it heightened awareness that was then deliberately suppressed. The sources speak in fragments often louder about logistics than morality. As evening settles fully, indigenous presence becomes quieter, not because it has vanished, but because it has been pushed to the margins of visibility. Fires burn farther away. Songs carry faintly on the air. The land holds memory even when people try not to hear it. You sense that this silence is not empty. It is charged. It holds lost endurance and unresolved tension. It exists alongside the routines you have followed all day, shaping them even when unspoken. As you move deeper into the night, this awareness stays with you. Everyday life in 1776. America rests on land already lived upon, shaped by histories that refuse to disappear quietly. The ground beneath your feet remembers even when those walking upon it choose not to. As the last of the daylight fades, movement itself begins to feel heavier. Travel in 1776. America is never casual, never spontaneous. Distance demands preparation, patience, and acceptance of discomfort. Even short journeys carry weight, because they cannot be undone easily once begun. You feel this when you consider leaving familiar ground. Roads exist, but they are uneven, narrow, and often little more than worn paths. Mud clings after rain. Dust rises in dry weather, coating skin and lungs. Every step reminds you that the land sets the terms, not your schedule. Most people walk far more than they ride. Horses are valuable and require care. Wagons are slower than they appear, their progress limited by terrain and load. You measure travel not in miles, but in hours of daylight and the condition of your body at the end. What daily experience makes plain is that movement reshapes perception. A place half a day away feels distant. News carried from there feels old even when recent. Relationships stretch and thin with distance, held together by effort rather than convenience. You set out knowing exactly when you must turn back. Darkness changes everything. Without light, familiar paths become uncertain. A misstep can mean injury. Injury can mean weeks of difficulty. You plan around the sun instinctively. A small but striking detail appears in travel accounts. People often describe journeys as emotional experiences rather than physical ones. Leaving home brought unease. Returning brought relief that bordered on gratitude. Familiar ground carried safety that was felt rather than explained. Travel is rarely solitary. You prefer company when possible. Shared movement reduces risk and eases fear. Conversation helps pass time and maintain alertness. Silence, when it comes, is chosen. There is still no clear agreement among modern researchers about how mobile colonial populations truly were. Some evidence suggests people travelled frequently within small regions. Other records imply that many lived and died within a narrow radius. Both patterns appear shaped by occupation and circumstance. You notice how travel exposes vulnerability. You carry what you need: food, water, a tool or weapon if available. You dress for the road rather than appearance. Comfort is sacrificed willingly for preparedness. Inns and taverns provide shelter, but they are uneven in quality. A good one becomes known quickly. A poor one is remembered longer. Stories about these places circulate, shaping routes as much as maps do. A quietly revealing habit shows up in letters. Travellers often described counting familiar landmarks. Trees bends in the road fence's stones. These markers anchored them, offering reassurance that they were still on the right path. Weather remains the ultimate authority. Rain delays, snow blocks, heat exhausts. You learn to respect conditions rather than fight them. Plans change without apology. As evening deepens, you feel the pull to stop moving. Rest matters more than progress. A safe place to sleep outweighs the desire to arrive sooner. Tomorrow will come regardless. You turn back or settle in, guided by instinct sharpened through repetition. The road does not promise speed. It promises effort. As you step into stillness, the awareness lingers that movement here is meaningful precisely because it is difficult. Every journey leaves a mark on the body and memory alike. In 1776, America travel teaches patience. It narrows the world while making each place feel deeply earned. And as you pause under the darkening sky, you feel how walking pace shapes not just distance, but the rhythm of life itself. Weather announces itself long before anyone names it. You feel it in your joints, in the way fabric clings or loosens, in how quickly breath turns shallow or deep. In 1776, America, the sky is not background scenery. It is authority issuing instructions that no one can ignore. Heat settles early in summer, thick and unyielding. You wake already warm, and by afternoon sweat has soaked into everything you wear. Work slows not because people choose rest, but because bodies demand it. Shade becomes valuable. Movement becomes deliberate. Water is rationed carefully, not just for drinking, but for survival. Cold behaves differently. It sharpens rather than smothers. Winter creeps into homes through gaps in walls and floors. You layer clothing, then add more. Fingers stiffen. Breath fogs the air even indoors. Fire becomes the centre of existence, not for comfort, but for continuation. People simply assume that weather will dictate plans. Fields are worked when conditions allow. Travel waits for clear days. Washing is delayed. Construction pauses. No one curses the sky for inconvenience. Complaining does nothing. Adaptation does everything. You notice how closely people watch the horizon. Clouds are read like text. Wind direction carries meaning. A sudden stillness can signal a coming storm. Experience replaces instruments. Knowledge lives in the body. A small human detail slips through in a farmer's notes. He mentions sleeping poorly before a storm-sensing pressure change without understanding why. The body knows before the mind does. Rain reshapes everything. Roads dissolve into mud. Rivers swell. Deliveries are delayed. Crops benefit or suffer depending on timing. Too much is as dangerous as too little. Balance matters, and balance is never guaranteed. Snow isolates. Paths disappear. Communities draw inward. Stored food becomes precious. Stories stretch longer by the fire. Darkness arrives early and lingers. Winter teaches patience whether you want to learn it or not. There are moments when weather offers relief. A breeze breaks a heat wave. A thaw softens frozen ground. These moments are noticed, appreciated, remembered. They feel like gifts rather than expectations. What motivates people's emotional response to weather is harder to pin down. Some accounts suggest resignation. Others reveal deep anxiety, especially after years of poor harvests. The same storm can inspire gratitude in one household and fear in another. Children learn weather as rule-maker early. They know which days allow play and which demand stillness. They learn to read the sky before they learn to read words. Clothing, food, and shelter all bend to climate. Diet shifts with temperature. Heavier meals appear in cold months. Lighter fare emerges when heat dulls appetite. Nothing is fixed. A quietly revealing behaviour appears during extreme weather. People help one another more openly. Labour is shared. Supplies are loaned. Survival sharpens community bonds. Storms pass, but memory remains. One bad season can influence decisions for years. Where to plant, when to store, how much to save. Weather writes itself into planning. As evening approaches, you feel temperature drop slightly. The day releases its grip. Muscles relax, breath deepens. The sky darkens, slowly stars beginning to emerge. You understand now that weather here is not small talk, it is structure. It decides when you eat, when you move, when you rest, and when you wait. In 1776, America, the climate is a constant companion, sometimes generous, sometimes harsh, always in control. And as you settle further into the evening, you do so with quiet respect for the sky above you. Knowing that tomorrow's shape has already begun forming somewhere in the clouds, as darkness settles more fully, the idea of order becomes visible in ways that daylight often hides. Law, in 1776. America does not live primarily in books or distant courts. It lives close by, shaped by neighbours' reputation, and the shared understanding of what will and will not be tolerated. You feel it in how people behave once the sun goes down. Voices soften, movements become more careful, not because danger suddenly appears, but because consequences feel nearer in the quiet. Everyone knows who enforces rules here, and enforcement is rarely abstract. Justice begins locally. Town officials, constables, elders, or respected landowners handle most disputes. You recognize their authority not by uniform or weapon, but by familiarity. These are people you see regularly. That closeness makes judgment personal. Punishment is often public. Stocks fines or corporal penalties are designed not only to correct behaviour, but to remind others of boundaries. Shame carries weight here. Being seen matters more than severity. The goal is deterrence through visibility. Everyday behaviour makes it clear that law is uneven. Wealth, gender, race, and social standing influence outcomes. A respected person receives warning where another receives penalty. This imbalance is understood even when it is not spoken aloud. A quietly telling detail appears in town records. Minor offences often go unpunished if the offender is known to be hard-working or useful. Contribution buys leniency. Idleness invites scrutiny. You notice how conflict is managed before it reaches formal judgment. Neighbours intervene. Family members mediate. Apologies are encouraged. Harmony is cheaper than escalation. Legal action costs time, money, and relationships. At the same time, authority is not gentle. Corporal punishment exists. Whippings, confinement, and public reprimands are real possibilities. Pain is accepted as corrective tool. The idea of rehabilitation has not yet formed as a goal. Children learn these boundaries early. They see who is corrected and how. Fear is practical, not abstract. Rules are absorbed through observation more than explanation. There is no single experience of justice. Some communities rely heavily on consensus. Others enforce rules rigidly. Much depends on who holds power locally and how they choose to exercise it. Later examination of court records reveals patterns that raise difficult questions. Some punishments appear inconsistent, others reflect prejudice rather than wrongdoing. The sources resist simple conclusions, offering fragments rather than clarity. A brief note in a traveller's journal mentions discomfort at witnessing punishment in a town square. For residents, it was ordinary. For outsiders, it felt unsettling. Perspective shapes acceptance. You sense how law here is less about fairness in the modern sense and more about maintaining order. Stability matters more than equality. Predictability matters more than compassion. As night deepens, you see how order is reinforced quietly. Doors are locked. paths avoided. People stay within known circles. Safety is communal, built on mutual watchfulness. Despite its harshness, this system functions because it is immediate. Consequences follow actions quickly. There is little distance between behavior and response. You carry this understanding with you as you move further into the evening. Law here is not distant or theoretical. It is lived daily, enforced by people you know, shaped by custom as much as rule. In 1776, America order rests on shared expectation rather than abstract rights. It holds communities together imperfectly, sometimes unjustly, but with enough force to keep daily life moving forward as the night closes in around you. As evening deepens and households draw inward attention turns to relationships that carry both comfort and constraint. Marriage intimacy and reputation shape daily life in ways that feel constant rather than dramatic. These matters are not private choices kept behind closed doors. They are community concerns observed and discussed quietly but persistently. You sense how closely people watch one another, who visits whom, who lingers too long, who walks together after dark. Behavior is noticed, remembered, and interpreted. Reputation here is a shared construction built slowly and damaged quickly. Marriage is understood less as romance and more as arrangement. Practicality guides decisions. Land labour skill and family connections matter deeply. Affection may grow over time, but it is rarely the starting point. Stability comes first. What daily life makes obvious is that unmarried adulthood is treated with suspicion, especially for women. Single status invites scrutiny. Questions arise. Assumptions follow. Marriage offers protection not just emotional, but social and economic. Courtship unfolds under watchful eyes. Visits happen in common spaces. Doors remain open. Conversations are polite and measured. Privacy exists in fragments. Intimacy develops cautiously shaped by expectation rather than impulse. A small but revealing habit appears in community records. Engagements are often announced publicly long before marriage occurs. This period functions as a test. Behavior during it is observed carefully. A broken engagement carries consequences. Sexual behavior outside marriage is not rare, but it is risky. Pregnancy makes secrets visible. Consequences fall unevenly. Women bear the weight of shame more heavily. Men may face fines or pressure to marry, but their reputations often recover faster. The question of consent appears rarely in records, not because it was absent, but because it was defined differently. Authority, obligation, and expectation blur together. Power shapes possibility in ways that are not always acknowledged. Later interpretations struggle to untangle how individuals felt within these constraints. Some accounts suggest acceptance and even contentment. Others hint at frustration and quiet rebellion. Experience varied widely, shaped by personality and circumstance. Children born outside marriage are noted carefully. Their status affects inheritance, opportunity, and belonging. Communities respond with a mix of judgment and accommodation, often depending on family standing. You notice how language softens difficult truths. Euphemisms appear in records where directness might offend. Silence fills gaps where honesty would be dangerous. Despite restriction, affection exists. Couples share labour, laughter, and quiet companionship. Love expresses itself through reliability rather than display. Showing up matters more than grand gestures. An understated observation in a letter mentions missing a spouse during separation not for emotional comfort alone, but for shared competence. Partnership is practical as well as personal. As night settles, households close ranks. Couples share beds often out of necessity rather than intimacy. Space is limited, bodies are close, boundaries are negotiated quietly. You realize that relationships here are less about self-expression and more about integration. Marriage connects families, behavior reflects on households, private choices ripple outward. As you prepare to move further into the evening, the weight of expectation remains. Reputation travels faster than truth. Belonging requires careful navigation. In 1776, America intimacy unfolds within a web of social oversight. Love exists, but it lives inside structure. And as you drift toward night, you feel how deeply relationships shape not just personal life, but the stability of the world around you. As the evening grows quieter, your thoughts drift toward those whose days have grown slower for reasons they didn't choose. Aging in 1776. America carries no ceremony. It arrives gradually, marked by aching joints, fading sight, and a growing awareness that strength no longer answers every demand. You notice older figures seated closer to the hearth hands, resting still more often than before. Their movements are careful, economical. They choose tasks wisely, now conserving energy for what matters most. Experience replaces speed. Memory replaces muscle. No one expects old age to be comfortable. It is assumed that the body will wear down just as tools do. The difference is that tools can be replaced. People cannot. Care becomes a family responsibility, not an institutional one. What everyday household patterns reveal is that elders rarely live alone if they can avoid it. They remain within family networks, contributing what they can. Advice, childcare, storytelling. Repair work that requires patience more than strength. Worth is measured by usefulness, even when usefulness changes shape. You sense how fear lingers beneath this arrangement. Without pensions or formal support, aging brings vulnerability. Illness threatens independence quickly. Injury carries long recovery. Becoming a burden is a quiet worry that few voice aloud. A small human detail surfaces in personal letters. Older parents sometimes apologize for their presence even while being cared for lovingly. Gratitude and anxiety coexist, expressed in careful words. There is dignity in adaptation. Elders adjust roles without protest. They rise later, rest more often, sit while others stand. This transition is not framed as loss, but as necessity. Women often shoulder the work of elder care alongside everything else. Feeding, cleaning, comforting. The labour is intimate and ongoing, blending into the rhythm of the household until it becomes almost invisible. At the same time, respect remains deeply ingrained. Elders are addressed formally, their opinions carry weight. Disrespect invites correction. Age commands deference even when dependence grows. The emotional experience of aging remains difficult to reconstruct fully. Some accounts suggest acceptance grounded in faith and family. Others hint at loneliness and fear. The record speaks softly here, offering glimpses rather than declarations. Children absorb lessons from watching elders. They learn that strength fades. They learn that contribution changes. They learn that belonging does not end when ability does. A quietly revealing habit appears in community gatherings. Older people are often positioned near warmth and light, both practical and symbolic. Comfort becomes priority without being discussed. As evening deepens, elders retreat earlier. Night is harder on tired bodies. Cold settles in joints. Fatigue arrives sooner. Rest becomes essential rather than optional. You feel how aging reshapes time. Days feel shorter. Tasks take longer. Memory stretches backward more easily than forward. Stories repeat not from forgetfulness alone, but from meaning. There is little romanticism here. Aging is not celebrated. It is endured with grace when possible, frustration when not. Humour softens edges. Complaints surface occasionally, then fade. As you move further into the quiet of night, you carry this awareness with you. Old age here is not hidden. It is woven into daily life, visible and acknowledged. In 1776, America growing old means staying present as long as you can, leaning on others when you must, and finding worth beyond physical strength. And as the household settles, you understand that survival here is not just about youth or vigour, but about enduring together generation after generation through the slow, steady passing of time. As the night settles fully around you, another presence becomes impossible to ignore. Death lives close here, not hidden behind distance or ceremony. It does not arrive only in emergencies. It waits patiently at the edge of ordinary life, familiar enough that people speak of it without lowering their voices. You sense this familiarity in the way illness is monitored, in how accidents are discussed, in how age is respected. Everyone knows someone who did not make it through a winter, a childbirth, a fever, or a fall. Loss is not unusual. It is expected even when it hurts. When death comes, it does not pause the world. The household shifts, absorbs the absence, and continues. Grief unfolds alongside chores, meals, and responsibilities. Tears appear, but so does work. Survival does not wait for mourning to finish. What everyday custom quietly confirms is that most people die at home, surrounded by familiar sounds and faces. Beds that held sleep now hold final breaths. Family members take on the roles of caretakers and witnesses. Death is intimate, not institutional. You notice how the body is handled with care and routine. Washing, dressing, positioning. These acts are done by people who knew the person in life. There is tenderness in the repetition, even when hands shake. A small but revealing habit appears in funeral preparations. Mirrors are sometimes covered, clocks stopped, windows opened briefly. These gestures vary by region and belief, but they share a common purpose. They mark transition, giving structure to loss. Children are present. They are not shielded entirely. They watch quietly, absorbing rituals without full understanding. Questions are answered simply. Death is treated as part of the world they're learning to navigate. Graves are dug by neighbours, often in family plots or small community grounds. Funerals are modest. Sermons focus on endurance and reunion rather than celebration. Comfort comes from familiarity, not spectacle. There remains uncertainty about how people emotionally process such frequent loss. Some personal writings suggest resilience born of repetition. Others reveal deep sorrow that never fully softened. The sources speak unevenly, reflecting individual differences rather than a single emotional pattern. You feel how mourning is both shared and private. Public rituals acknowledge loss. Private grief unfolds in quieter moments. A chair left empty, a tool unused, a voice no longer heard at the table. An offhand line in a widow's letter mentions learning to sleep alone again after decades of sharing a bed. The sentence is brief, almost casual, but its weight lingers. Loss reshapes the smallest habits. Religion offers language for death, but not always comfort. Faith explains where the dead go. It does not always explain why they left. People accept this tension without demanding resolution. As the night deepens, stories of the dead surface more easily. Names are spoken. Memories are shared. Laughter appears unexpectedly. Life insists on continuing even in the presence of absence. You sense how this closeness to death sharpens appreciation for ordinary moments. A warm meal, a shared task, a quiet evening. These are not taken for granted. They are recognized as temporary. As you move toward rest, the awareness stays with you. Death here is not hidden, but it is not constant terror either. It is a boundary that shapes behavior gently but firmly. In 1776, America dying is not removed from daily life. It is woven into it, shaping caution, community, and care. And as you settle into the quiet of night, you do so with the understanding that every ordinary day lived through is quietly meaningful, precisely because it is never guaranteed. Night has fully claimed the sky now, and with it comes a narrowing of the world. Darkness presses close, not as something frightening, but as a signal to turn inward. Firelight becomes the center of attention, pulling bodies and thoughts toward its warm, flickering edge. You feel how the house changes after sunset. Rooms shrink, corners soften, shadows stretch and retreat with each movement of flame. Without lamps or switches, light is intentional. Each candle is placed with care. Each fire is tended thoughtfully. Too much light wastes resources. Too little invites accident. The hearth glows steadily, its crackle low and reassuring. Wood pops softly, releasing a familiar scent that settles into clothing and hair. Smoke curls upward, drawn toward chimneys that sometimes work well and sometimes do not. You adjust your position instinctively, avoiding stinging eyes while staying close enough to feel warmth on your face. Evening tasks unfold slowly. Tools are cleaned and set aside. Food is prepared for the next day if energy allows. Clothes are folded or hung carefully. These actions feel quieter than daytime labour, less urgent, but no less necessary. You notice how conversation changes. Voices lower, words stretch out. Silence appears between sentences without discomfort. Storytelling feels natural now. Memories surface. Someone recounts a familiar tale altered slightly by time and repetition. No one corrects it. Accuracy matters less than rhythm. A detail buried in a household account mentions how people often saved certain tasks for firelight, especially mending. Hands moved more slowly, then guided by touch as much as sight. The pace itself became part of rest. Children grow drowsy. Their movements soften. Heads lean against shoulders. Someone lifts a child without ceremony and carries them toward a sleeping space. Bedtime is not announced. It is felt. The outside world fades. Sounds diminish. A distant animal call drifts in, then disappears. Wind moves through trees. The night feels wide beyond the walls, but safe enough within them. It is difficult to know exactly how people experience this narrowing of space emotionally. Some writings suggest relief at the day's end. Others hint at restlessness, especially during long winters. The experience likely depended on temperament as much as circumstance. You feel how firelight shapes attention. It encourages stillness. It invites reflection without demanding it. Thoughts wander more easily here, untethered from immediate obligation. A quietly revealing habit appears in descriptions of evening gatherings. People often sat closer together at night even when space allowed otherwise. Warmth mattered, but so did presence. Closeness reassured. As the fire burns lower, someone stirs the embers, banking them carefully. Ashes arranged, just so preserving heat without risking sparks. This small ritual marks the final transition of the day. Candles are snuffed one by one. Darkness fills the spaces they leave behind. The last light remains near the hearth, glowing softly like a heartbeat slowing. You stretch, feeling fatigue settle fully now. Muscles loosen, breath deepens. The day releases its hold. As you move towards sleep, firelight lingers in your vision even after your eyes adjust to darkness. Its warmth stays with you, both physical and emotional. In 1776, American night does not bring isolation. It brings enclosure. The world contracts, gently offering rest not through silence alone, but through shared presence and familiar routines. And as you step fully into the quiet, you do so guided by flame shadow and the deep, steady rhythm of another ordinary day drawing to a close. By the late hours of night, silence becomes a companion of its own, not merely the absence of activity. You notice how every creak and whisper of the house gains weight now. The wooden frame breathes, floors contract and expand, windows rattle faintly in their frames. Even the fire seems aware, shifting as if to maintain warmth without claiming attention. You feel how sound and absence of sound shape awareness. Every movement is measured. Footsteps on worn boards are heard across the room. A child stirs. Animals shift in the corner. Nothing escapes notice, yet nothing demands a damn. The rhythm of the night has its own order. What daily life shows clearly is that the night is not empty. It is dense with subtle motion. Observing it trains perception, teaching attentiveness without instruction. People learn to read cues that are invisible in daylight. A faint scent of smoke indicates a dying ember. A shadow indicates a visitor. Small details carry information essential for survival. You notice how the household adapts to night. Food is secured, tools are stowed, doors are closed but not locked because familiarity itself provides security. Sleep is negotiated. Everyone takes their turn in shared space, balancing warmth, comfort, and breathing room. An almost unnoticed detail appears in diaries and letters. People sometimes leave small gifts of water or food near the fire for those who wake in the night. Practicality and care coexist silently. These gestures are neither ceremonial nor recorded formally, yet they recur often enough to suggest intentionality. There is subtle tension in the air. Vulnerability is real, especially in winter or during storms. People shift position. Someone ensures a child is safe. Someone else listens for distant sounds. Sleep is deepened by trust, but never total. Awareness remains a quiet companion. Interpretations of nighttime routines vary among historians. Some argue that vigilance shaped identity and strengthened household cohesion. Others suggest constant attentiveness generated fatigue and anxiety. Both perspectives are visible in letters and journals, offering fragments rather than conclusions. You feel how firelight influences perception. Shadows stretch across walls, turning familiar objects into fleeting figures. This effect trains the eye, allowing recognition of subtle motion. The household becomes a landscape of contrasts where brightness and darkness carry meaning. Children experience night differently. Their curiosity competes with fatigue. They test limits quietly, learning boundaries through observation rather than formal instruction. Adults respond with minimal correction, relying on repetition to guide behavior. A small, quietly revealing habit shows up repeatedly. People keep personal items, clothing, small tools, or keepsakes close to their beds. These items serve as comfort, utility, or both. Their placement is practical, almost ritualistic, unnoticed by anyone outside the household. You sense how fatigue changes decision-making. Movements slow, speech softens, actions are deliberate. Mistakes are fewer, but the cost of error feels higher. Night shapes the rhythm as much as day, enforcing patience and attention. By the time sleep becomes inevitable, bodies relax, breathing evens, and the house seems to fold inward. Darkness no longer presses, it cushions. The household exists together in quiet coordination, each life acknowledging the others without speaking. In 1776, Americanite teaches attentiveness, patience, and the subtle art of living with others. It is not merely a pause, it is preparation, reflection, and gentle endurance. And as you lie down, carrying the weight and quiet of the day, you settle into a rhythm that belongs entirely to the night, enveloped by shadows, warmth, and the faint, steady crackle of fire. As the deepest part of the night stretches onward, your attention shifts inward to the body itself and the quiet awareness it brings. Muscles relax, joints loosen, and breath finds a rhythm that does not demand thought. This is a time when the senses, though muted, are sharply attuned to subtle changes in temperature, sound, and texture. You notice the faint chill along the floorboards. Even well-layered clothing cannot fully block it. You pull blankets closer, adjusting for warmth. The smell of smoke has faded to something comforting, almost familiar, blending with the lingering sense of earlier meals. Each inhalation carries memory as much as it carries air. Daily life shows that people often wake briefly during the night. These awakenings are not alarming. They are part of natural rhythm. Some tend the fire, others shift positions, and children may murmur softly in sleep. Awareness and rest coexist seamlessly, woven into the same fabric of living. A small human detail appears in personal letters. People sometimes use these quiet hours to reflect, write notes, or plan small tasks for the following day. Night offered uninterrupted thought in a way daytime rarely did. The hush provided clarity even amid fatigue. You notice how the body remembers work and movement from earlier in the day. Muscles recall tension, joints recall repetition. Sleep is interrupted occasionally by aches or awareness of strain, but the mind adapts, integrating discomfort without panic. Historians continue to debate the significance of segmented sleep in colonial America. Some suggest it allowed for productive quiet periods, during which reflection, household planning, or prayer could occur. Others argue it may have been a burden, leaving people more susceptible to fatigue. The evidence supports both possibilities depending on season, occupation, and environment. Sounds that seem negligible during daylight gain prominence. A door creaks, a branch taps against a window. The wind shifts, animals move in their sleeping areas. Each faint noise is registered and processed, though rarely acted upon. The night becomes a landscape of subtle motion. Children too are shaped by these rhythms. Even in sleep they adjust posture, shift blankets, and respond to sounds instinctively. They are learning the language of living in a space shared by others, observing boundaries and tuning senses without conscious instruction. An intriguing but overlooked observation appears in diaries. Some people noted dreaming of ordinary activities of chores, conversations, or travel. Dreams blend memory and expectation, creating continuity with daytime experience. They are rarely fantastical. They reflect the habitual nature of life. You notice how time feels slower now. Minutes stretch and compress depending on restlessness, observation, or imagination. The household exists in a soft balance. There is presence without urgency, movement without purpose, beyond sustaining life and comfort. As the night approaches its final hours, awareness deepens. You're both part of the household and alone within your body. The rhythm of breathing, the warmth of layered clothing, and the quiet pulse of fire and shadow form a sanctuary. Sleep is both refuge and preparation for what comes next. In 1776, America Deep Night is a teacher of endurance, attention, and subtle awareness. It is intimate, shared, and restorative. And as you drift further into rest, you feel the invisible structure of the household, the land and the day itself supporting you, gently, invisibly, and completely. The final stretch of night carries a hush that feels almost sacred. You lie still, aware of every small movement around you. The household breathes in unison, a quiet rhythm that anchors you. Even the fire speaks softly, now sending amber light flickering across walls and ceilings, settling gently onto blankets and floors. You feel the weight of layers, the fabric pressing lightly, familiar and comforting. It has molded itself to your body through repetition and habit. Linen, wool, and perhaps a patchwork quilt hold warmth, while letting just enough air through to prevent stifling. The combination of textures carries memory, the heat of midday, the dust of travel, the smoke from hearth and lamp. These sensations are constant companions, and you have learned to let them exist without thought. Every creak and groan of the house is now meaningful. Wood contracts in the cooler air. Windows rattle slightly against the frame. Animals move subtly in response to the night's quiet. A soft shuffle, a low grunt, or a shift in bedding. You notice these sounds without reacting, integrating them into your awareness as part of the world rather than disturbance. Children are nestled close. Their breathing is even relaxed. Occasionally a murmur or movement hints at half-formed dreams. You allow their presence to settle into the rhythm of your own rest. Sleep itself becomes layered light at first, then heavier, interspersed with brief moments of consciousness. You're aware of it without interrupting it. A quietly revealing detail from diaries of the era shows that some adults use these night hours for reflection. They planned the next day, noted small observations, or considered household needs. Night provides a liminal space where thought flows differently than during labor or daylight activity. The temperature shifts subtly. If the night is cool, you adjust slightly, tucking more fabric close, or turning toward the warmth of the fire. If it is warmer, you allow space, stretching limbs gently against the weight of blankets. Your body responds to small changes without conscious effort, guided by experience and instinct. Historians continue to debate the effects of these nightly routines on long-term health and mental state. Some argue that segmented sleep allowed for reflection, social observation, and adaptation to seasonal challenges. Others suggest it produced fatigue and subtle stress. Evidence supports both possibilities, and daily life likely fluctuated according to season, labor, and household composition. You sense the household as a living organism. Heat, light, sound, and movement circulate together, creating cohesion without explicit coordination. Even when awake for a brief moment, you feel embedded in this pattern. Observation blends with rest awareness with dreaming. A minor but telling habit appears repeatedly in letters and journals. People often kept small items nearby tools, cloth, or objects of value. These serve practical purposes but also provide comfort. Their presence reassures without intrusion, subtly influencing sleep and positioning. Outside darkness is absolute. Stars gleam faintly through small windows, and the sky stretches wide beyond the walls. The contrast between interior warmth and exterior vastness reinforces a sense of both enclosure and perspective. You are contained and protected, yet aware of the larger world. Time itself behaves differently in these hours. Minutes stretch and compress unbound from the strict routines of day. You drift along with them, carried gently toward the approaching dawn. The night has trained patience, attentiveness, and subtle sensory awareness, all without instruction. As you sink further into sleep, the household continues around you. Quiet, steady, reliable. You rest not just for yourself, but within the shared rhythm of the community. Every sound, every shadow, every breath contributes to a gentle, sustaining pattern. In 1776, America Deep Night is not empty. It is layered alive and quietly instructive. You sleep within it, learning endurance, presence, and awareness. The day's labor, its meals, its care, its relationships all settle into memory, folded into your rest as preparation for the hours to come.